The sun was setting over the small Texas town, painting the sky with soft orange and pink colors. The evening breeze carried the scent of dust, dry grass, and warm bread from the diner on the corner. The streets were quiet except for the sound of horses in the distance and the slow rumble of an old truck passing by. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, where people waved even if they didn't know your name. Inside the diner, sitting near the window, was a young woman named Emily. She was new to town and still getting used to the quiet rhythm of country life. She held a straw hat in her hands, twisting it nervously. Her soft brown hair fell loosely around her shoulders, and her light green eyes watched the people outside with a mix of curiosity and loneliness. Emily had come from the city, a place full of lights and voices, but empty when it came to real kindness. She had left everything behind after her job ended, and her closest friend moved away. She needed a new start, somewhere she could breathe again. The diner was small but warm, with wooden walls covered in photos of local rodeos and sunsets. The smell of coffee and fresh pie filled the air. The owner, Mrs. Wilkins, an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes, smiled as she poured coffee for her few evening customers. Emily often came here after her work at the small-town library, not because she needed food, but because it felt less lonely than sitting in her quiet little rented room. That night, as she sat with a cup of coffee, the doorbell above the diner door jingled. A man stepped in, tall and steady, with a calm look that made people turn to notice him. His name was Jake Carson. He was a local cowboy, known for his quiet nature and honest work. People respected him. He ran his late father's ranch just outside town, raising cattle and horses. Life hadn't been easy on him, but he never complained. Jake removed his hat as he entered, giving a polite nod to Mrs. Wilkins. "Evening, ma'am," he said in his slow country voice. Then his eyes caught Emily's. He had seen her a few times around town, at the library, at the farmer's market, once walking by the field road, but had never spoken to her. There was something about her eyes that always drew his attention. They were gentle, like she had seen sadness but still carried hope somewhere deep inside. He walked to the counter and ordered a black coffee. When he turned back, he noticed the empty seat across from Emily. She quickly looked away, embarrassed that he caught her watching him. Jake smiled a little and walked over. "Mind if I sit here?" he asked kindly. Emily hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Sure," she said softly, moving her cup aside. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the clinking of dishes. Jake finally broke the silence. "You're new around here," he said. "Don't think I've seen you before last month," Emily nodded. "Yes, I just moved here. I work at the library now. I help organize the books and do a bit of cataloging." Jake smiled faintly. "That's good. The library's been quiet for too long. Folks around here mostly come in for the free air conditioning in summer." Emily gave a small laugh, and Jake noticed it was the first real smile she had shown that evening. It made her face light up in a gentle way. They talked for a while about simple things. The weather, the dusty roads, the stray dog that slept by the town square. Jake asked if she liked Texas. She said she was still getting used to it but loved the sunsets. He nodded, saying, "There's something special out here. Every day looks different." When he stood up to leave, he touched his hat and said, "Welcome to our town, Miss Emily. Folks here are good people. If you ever need a hand with something, just ask for Jake Carson. Most people know where to find me." She smiled softly. "Thank you, Mr. Carson." After he left, Emily sat for a long time replaying the conversation in her mind. There was something steady about him, something different from anyone she had met in the city. There was no rush in his words, no hidden meaning, no games, just quiet kindness. Days turned into weeks. Jake started visiting the library more often, returning books he borrowed, though Emily sometimes noticed the books were barely opened. One day she asked, smiling, "You really read all these?" He grinned. "Maybe not all, but I figured I'd better return them to see if you'd smile again." Emily felt her cheeks warm. She shook her head, but her heart felt lighter. Over time, they began talking more. Sometimes Jake helped her carry boxes of old books to the storeroom. Sometimes he brought her apples from his ranch. They spoke about their lives, on slowly, piece by piece. She told him about the noise of the city, the long hours at her old job, and how she never really felt like she belonged anywhere. He told her about his family ranch, how hard the drought had hit, and how he'd almost given up before the rains came back last year. They didn't call it friendship. It was something gentler, something that grew quietly like a seed under warm soil. One Saturday evening, Jake invited her to the annual town fair. The whole town came alive that night. Lanterns hanging on fences, music echoing through the air, children running with cotton candy, and laughter rising from the crowd. Emily had never seen anything like it. She walked beside Jake, her eyes wide, her smile brighter than he had ever seen. He bought her a small paper flower from one of the stalls, and she kept it tucked in her hair the whole evening. When they sat by the fence watching the fireworks, Jake noticed her eyes reflecting the colors in the sky. "You fit in here just fine," he said quietly. She looked at him. "I didn't think I would, but maybe I needed this place more than I knew." Their friendship deepened over the next few months. Emily became part of the town. She helped at the school reading program, baked pies for the community events, and often visited Jake's ranch to feed the horses. She loved the peaceful sound of the wind moving through the grass. Jake admired her strength. Not the loud kind, but the quiet one. The kind that comes from pain survived and lessons learned. He never asked about her past because he knew if she wanted to tell him, she would. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Jake and Emily were walking by the pasture near his ranch. The air was warm and full of the scent of wildflowers. Fireflies began to glow among the grass. Emily stopped near the fence and looked at the horizon. "Jake," she said softly, "can I tell you something?" He turned toward her. "Of course." She hesitated, her voice trembling slightly. "I've never been kissed before." For a moment the world went still. The wind slowed. The sound of crickets filled the space between them. Jake didn't laugh, didn't look surprised. He just looked at her with those calm eyes of his, eyes that never made anyone feel small. She looked down quickly, embarrassed. "I know it's silly. Most people my age already have. I never felt right about it. I always thought it should mean something, and it never did." Jake was quiet. Then he took off his cowboy hat, holding it by his side. He stepped closer, careful and slow, not wanting to startle her. "That's not silly at all," he said gently. "It just means you were waiting for the right moment. There's nothing wrong with that." Emily looked up at him. The last light of the sun touched her face, and her eyes looked softer than ever. He smiled a little and said quietly, "Then, let's start slow." He didn't reach for her right away. Instead, he lifted his hand and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch was careful, almost protective. Then he simply took her hand, and warm, rough from his work, steady. They stood there, fingers interlocked, feeling the quiet between them. Emily felt her heart race, but not from fear. It was something else, and something gentle, safe, and new. She could hear the sound of his heartbeat when he moved a little closer, and the faint smell of hay and leather around him made her chest tighten in a strange, warm way. They didn't need words. The silence was enough. The sun finally disappeared behind the hills, leaving only the golden glow of twilight. Fireflies blinked softly around them, and somewhere in the distance a horse neighed. Jake finally spoke, his voice quiet. "You don't rush something special, Emily. You take your time and you let it mean what it's supposed to." She nodded slowly. "I think I understand now." He smiled again and gave her hand a small squeeze. "Good," he said softly. For Emily, that simple touch was everything she had been missing. Not just love, but kindness, respect, and peace. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel unwanted. She felt seen, truly seen. That night, when she walked home, she couldn't stop smiling. The stars were brighter, the air cooler, and every step felt lighter. She held her hand close to her heart, as if the warmth of that moment still lingered. From that evening on, something quietly changed between them. They didn't rush. They didn't label what was happening. But every time they met, every small smile, every word shared under the soft Texas sky, carried the same gentle truth that sometimes the slowest beginnings lead to the strongest bonds. And for Emily, who once believed her life would always be quiet and lonely, that first small step, that first hand held under the open sky, was the start of everything she had ever hoped to find. The next morning, Emily woke up early, sunlight softly falling across her small wooden room. She could still feel the warmth of Jake's hand from last night, and it made her heart flutter in a quiet way. It wasn't excitement like she'd felt in the city when things were fast and uncertain. This was calm, real and steady. She smiled to herself as she brushed her hair and prepared for another day at the library. As she walked through the main street, people greeted her kindly now. The postman waved. Mrs. Wilkins from the diner called out a cheerful "Morning, dear," and even old Mr. Hayes tipped his hat. In just a few months, this little town had become home. And much of that was because of one person, Jake Carson. Jake, meanwhile, was already up before sunrise as usual. He had fed the horses, checked the fences, and cleaned the stables. Yet that morning felt different. When he looked at the horizon, he caught himself smiling. For the first time in years, life didn't feel heavy. He thought about Emily's shy laugh, her soft voice when she said she'd never been kissed, and the trust in her eyes when he held her hand. It stayed with him through the whole morning. Later that week, Emily came to the ranch with a basket of muffins she'd baked. She wanted to thank Jake for helping her fix the door at the library last weekend. The ranch stretched wide and golden, with green fields rolling far into the distance. Horses grazed near the fence and 2 dogs ran around happily. Jake was fixing the old barn door when she arrived. He looked up and smiled. "Well, look who's here," he said, wiping his hands on a cloth. "You didn't have to bring anything." Emily shook her head. "It's just a little thank you," she said. "You've been so kind since I came here." He took the basket, opening it with curiosity. "You baked these yourself?" She nodded proudly. "Yes, they're blueberry." He grinned. "Then they're already perfect." They sat on the porch steps, sharing the muffins and talking about simple things and the weather, the fair, and the new books arriving at the library. Jake told her about a stubborn horse that refused to follow his lead, and Emily laughed so hard her eyes filled with tears. It had been a long time since she laughed like that. Not polite laughter, but the kind that comes from real joy. As the days went by, Emily started visiting the ranch more often. She helped feed the chickens, brushed the horses, and even learned how to milk a cow, though she ended up laughing more than working. Jake watched her carefully, always making sure she was comfortable. He liked seeing how she found beauty in small things, the way she stopped to listen to birds, or how she smiled when a breeze carried the smell of fresh hay. One evening they sat by the fire pit outside. The sky was full of stars and the night air was cool. Jake handed her a blanket. "It gets cold fast out here," he said. "Thank you," she whispered, wrapping it around herself. They sat quietly for a long time, watching the sparks float up into the dark. Emily looked at him and said softly, "Jake, I used to think life had nothing left for me. I used to wake up every day feeling lost. But since I came here, everything feels new again." Jake turned to her, his expression gentle. "You just needed a place that felt right. Everyone does. Sometimes it's not about finding something big. Sometimes it's just about finding peace." She nodded, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "You make things feel peaceful," she said. He smiled faintly, lowering his gaze. "You do the same for me, Emily." Their friendship deepened into something neither of them needed to define. There was no rush, no pressure, just understanding. Jake respected her quietness, and Emily respected his calm. They learned each other's rhythms, when to talk, when to stay silent, when a simple smile was enough. Months passed, and the season began to change. The summer heat softened, and autumn came with gold leaves and the smell of wood smoke. One afternoon, the town held a harvest gathering. Families came with homemade pies, music played, and laughter filled the air. Emily wore a simple white dress with a small sunflower pinned to her hair. When Jake saw her, his heart skipped a beat. She looked radiant, not because of fancy clothes, but because happiness suited her. When the music started, Jake hesitated. He wasn't one for dancing, but when he saw Emily sitting by herself, he gathered his courage. Walking over, he offered his hand. "Would you dance with me?" he asked softly. Emily looked up in surprise. "I'm not very good at it," she said. "Neither am I," he replied with a small grin. "Guess we'll make a good pair then." She took his hand and they joined the others under the string lights. The music was slow, gentle like an old memory. Jake moved carefully, guiding her steps. Emily laughed nervously at first, stepping on his boot once, but he didn't mind. "You're doing fine," he said, his voice calm. As the song went on, their movements fell into rhythm, and the world around them faded. For a few moments there was only them, her hand in his steady heartbeat and the soft wind brushing through her hair. When the music stopped, they didn't let go right away. They just looked at each other and smiled, knowing something had quietly changed. That night, after walking her home, Jake stood on her porch. The moonlight lit her face softly. "Thank you for the dance," she said. "Thank you for saying yes," he replied. Before leaving, he tipped his hat and said gently, "Sleep well. Miss Emily." She watched him walk away until he disappeared down the road, and then she stood there for a long time, feeling a kind of warmth that words couldn't explain. The following weeks brought small moments that built their story. Jake brought her fresh flowers from the ranch, simple wild ones tied with a ribbon. Emily made him pies and brought them wrapped in warm cloth. Sometimes they'd ride horses along the trail talking about dreams and life. She told him she wanted to write one day. Stories about kindness, hope, and people who changed quietly. He told her she already was one of those stories. But one afternoon, news came that Jake's ranch had suffered heavy storm damage. A section of the fence was gone and several cattle had escaped. Emily rushed to help. When she arrived, Jake was muddy and exhausted, fixing the posts under the pouring rain. She ran toward him, ignoring the rain soaking her dress.
"Jake!"
"Let me help," she said. He shook his head. "You'll catch cold out here." "I don't care," she said firmly. "You helped everyone else when they needed it. Let me help you now." They worked side by side through the rain, hammering, tying ropes, guiding the animals back in. Hours later, drenched and tired, they finally finished. Jake looked at her, water dripping from his hair, and smiled softly. "You're something else, Emily," she laughed breathlessly. "Guess I just learned from the best." He handed her his coat to keep warm. "You shouldn't have come out here in the storm," he said. She looked up at him, her voice low. "I couldn't stay away knowing you needed help." Jake didn't speak for a moment. Then he gently placed his hand on her cheek. "You've got more courage than most people I know." She smiled faintly. "Or maybe I just care more than I should." He shook his head slowly. "You care just right." That night, as they stood under the small porch, rain still falling softly around them, they didn't need words. The world outside was wild, but in that small space everything felt calm. Emily realized that the man standing in front of her wasn't just someone she admired. He had become the part of her life that made everything make sense. As winter came, their bond grew even deeper. The town grew colder, but they found warmth in each other's company. On Christmas Eve, Jake invited her to the ranch for dinner with a few friends. The fire crackled, laughter filled the room, and for the first time in years, Emily felt part of something real. Later, when everyone left, they sat quietly by the fire, the glow lighting their faces. Jake looked at her and said softly, "You've brought a lot of light into this place, Emily." She turned to him. "And you've shown me what peace feels like." He nodded slowly. "Peace and love, sometimes they're the same thing." They sat in silence for a moment. Then, remembering that night by the pasture months ago, Jake reached for her hand again. It was the same way he had before, gentle, sure, full of quiet respect. This time, Emily squeezed his hand first. Jake smiled. "You remember when you said you'd never been kissed?" he asked quietly. She blushed a little. "Yes." He leaned closer, still soft-spoken. "You also said you wanted it to mean something, I think. Now it would." Emily met his eyes, steady, kind, full of warmth, and nodded slowly. The room was silent except for the crackle of the fire. He didn't rush. He simply looked at her as if he wanted her to feel safe. And in that still moment, surrounded by the quiet of the ranch, their hearts found each other. It wasn't passion that filled the air. It was tenderness, the kind that lasts a lifetime. When she went home that night, snow had started to fall. The street shimmered under the moonlight. Emily held her scarf close and smiled to herself. Life had brought her to a small town when she least expected it, and it had given her something rare. A love built on kindness, patience, and truth. Years later, people in town would still talk about Jake and Emily. They would say how the cowboy who once lived alone found the one person who understood his quiet heart, and how the shy girl who came from the city found her forever home in the open skies of Texas. And whenever they walked together, through fairs, down dirt roads, or by the same pasture where it all began, they still held hands the same way they did that first evening, slow and gentle,